The unwanted human Sarah Chen crouched behind the rocky outcrop, her rifle resting against the weathered stone. The alien battlefield stretched before her like a nightmare painted in rust and shadow. 3 suns blazed overhead, casting strange purple shadows. Across the cratered landscape of Kepler 44 wasn't supposed to be here. The Galactic Defense Coalition had made that crystal clear when they reluctantly accepted Earth's application to join their ranks. Humans were too new, too primitive, too emotional for real combat operations. They could serve in support roles, supply chains, maybe communications if they proved themselves reliable enough, but war had a way of changing plans. Private Chen, maintain your position and observe only, came the crackling voice of Commander Thex through her comm unit. The reptilian Zathari's voice carried the usual mixture of condescension and barely concealed irritation that had become Sarah's constant companion over the past 6 months. Sarah adjusted her scope and watched the alien forces moving across the valley below. The enemy Krathen looked like walking nightmares, their chitinous black armor gleaming in the triple sunlight. They moved with mechanical precision, their plasma weapons crackling with deadly energy. Intelligence reports said they were advancing toward the Coalition's main supply depot, and if they succeeded, the entire sector would fall. The Coalition forces were falling back. Sarah could see the blue-skinned Altarians retreating in good order, their energy shields flickering under enemy fire. The massive Gorvak warriors, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall, provided cover with their heavy weapons. But even they couldn't stop the Krathen advance. All units fall back to secondary positions, ordered General Vex, the Coalition's overall commander. His voice carried across all frequencies, calm despite the chaos below. Human observers maintain distance and prepare for evacuation, Sarah grimaced. Human observers. That's all they thought she was good for. Back on Earth, she had been the best sniper in the Marine Corps. She could put a bullet through a target at over a mile in perfect conditions. But here, with alien weapons and alien enemies, the Coalition brass treated her like a tourist with a camera. She watched through her scope as the Krathen forces moved with practiced efficiency. Their formation was textbook perfect, but Sarah noticed something the alien commanders had missed. The enemy was bunching up as they moved through a narrow pass between 2 hills. It was a tactical bottleneck that could be exploited, but only by someone with the right position and the right weapon. Sarah looked down at her rifle. It wasn't standard Coalition equipment. The other species had tried to get humans to use their energy weapons, but Sarah had insisted on keeping her modified Barrett M82. The Coalition's weapons experts had laughed at her primitive chemical propulsion system, but they had eventually allowed her to keep it as a curiosity. Now, as she watched the enemy advance, Sarah realized that her primitive weapon might be exactly what the situation called for. The Krathen commander was easy to spot. Unlike his troops, he wore ornate golden armor that caught the light as he moved. He was positioned near the center of the formation, protected by layers of soldiers but visible to someone with the right angle and the right equipment. Sarah did the calculations in her head. Range approximately 100 yards. Wind minimal in the thin atmosphere. Target, moving at a steady pace through predictable terrain. It was a difficult shot but not impossible. The problem was her orders. Private Chen, begin movement to evacuation point Echo. Commander Thex's voice crackled through her comm. Coalition forces are pulling back. You are not authorized for engagement. Sarah's finger hovered over her comm button. She could acknowledge the order, pack up her equipment, and retreat like a good little observer. She could follow protocol and let the Coalition forces handle things their way. She could prove that humans were reliable and obedient, even if they weren't considered useful. Or she could take the shot. Through her scope, she watched as Krathen forces continued their advance. In minutes, they would be through the pass and spreading out across the open ground. The Coalition's retreat would turn into a rout, and the supply depot would fall. Thousands of Coalition soldiers depended on those supplies. Without them, the entire defensive line would collapse. Sarah made her choice. She adjusted her position, steadying her rifle against the rock. The Krathen commander was still visible, still moving through her crosshairs. She controlled her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow as she entered the zone that every sniper knew. The world narrowed to just her weapon, and the target. Private Chen, respond immediately. Thex's voice was getting sharper. Begin movement to evacuation point. Sarah switched off her comm. The wind had died to almost nothing. The target was moving at a steady pace, his ornate armor making him stand out against the dark mass of his troops. Sarah calculated the lead time, adjusted for the planet's slightly different gravity, and took up the slack in her trigger. The Barrett roared. The sound echoed across the battlefield like thunder. Sarah's shoulder absorbed the recoil as she kept her eye on the scope, watching the bullets flight through the thin atmosphere. Time seemed to stretch as the projectile crossed the distance between Sarah and her target. Below, coalition forces continued their retreat, unaware that a single human had just disobeyed direct orders and taken what might be the most important shot of the war. The bullet struck the Krathen commander in the center of his chest, punching through his ornate armor like it was made of paper. The impact spun him around and dropped him to the ground in a tangle of golden metal and dark flesh. For a moment, nothing happened. The Krathen forces continued their advance, unaware that their leader had fallen. Then someone noticed the commander's absence and the tight formation began to waver. Sarah worked the bolt on her rifle and chambered another round. The enemy forces were starting to cluster around their fallen leader, breaking their disciplined advance to check on their commander. It was exactly the kind of confusion that coalition forces could exploit. She reached for her comm unit and switched it back on. Command, this is Private Chen. Enemy commander is down. Repeat, enemy commander is down at grid reference 247891. Recommend immediate counterattack. While enemy forces are disrupted, the comm channel erupted in alien voices speaking in multiple languages. Sarah couldn't understand most of what was being said, but the tone was clear enough. Some voices sounded excited, others angry, and a few seemed completely shocked. General Vex's voice cut through the chatter. Private Chen, confirm your last transmission. Did you say the enemy commander is down? Confirmed, General. Clean kill at approximately 2100 yards. Enemy forces are clustering around the position and their advance has stalled. There was a long pause. Sarah could practically hear the gears turning in the general's mind as he processed what had just happened. A human soldier acting without orders had just accomplished something that none of the coalition's advanced technology had been able to achieve. All units. The general's voice was calm, but Sarah could hear the undercurrent of excitement. Enemy commander has been eliminated. Begin immediate counterattack. Take advantage of their confusion. Sarah watched through her scope as coalition forces turned their retreat into an advance. The Krathen, leaderless and confused, were caught completely off guard. What had been a certain victory for the enemy was turning into a rout, and it had all started with one impossible shot from a human they had told to stay on the sidelines. The shot heard. Across the galaxy, the coalition command post buzzed with activity as reports flooded in from the battlefield. General Vex stood before a massive holographic display, showing the engagement zone, his forearms working multiple control interfaces simultaneously. The Krathen advance had not just stopped, it had completely collapsed. Sarah Chen sat in an uncomfortable chair designed for beings much larger than humans, her rifle propped against the metal wall beside her. She had been invited to the command post immediately after the battle, though the armed escorts made it clear this was not optional. Commander Thex paced in front of her, his reptilian features twisted with barely controlled anger. Private Chen, you directly disobeyed a clear order to maintain observation only. You engaged enemy forces without authorization and deliberately broke communication protocol. Sarah kept her expression neutral. She had known this conversation was coming from the moment she pulled the trigger. Yes, sir. I did. You admit to insubordination? I admit to doing my job, sir. My job is to protect coalition forces and complete the mission. The mission was to stop the Krathen advance and protect the supply depot. Thex's scaled fists clenched. Your job is to follow orders, human. Your species was accepted into this coalition on the understanding that you would serve in support roles only. You were specifically told that humans lack the discipline for frontline combat operations. With respect, sir, the results speak for themselves. Before Thex could respond, General Vex approached their group. The general was an impressive figure even by alien standards, a member of the Nexari species. He stood nearly 4 meters tall with forearms and deep purple skin marked with bioluminescent patterns. His species had been fighting wars when humans were still learning to make fire. Private Chen, the general's voice carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect across a dozen worlds. Walk with me. Sarah stood and followed the general to a quieter section of the command post. Through the transparent aluminum windows, She could see coalition forces moving across the battlefield below, securing positions that had seemed impossible to hold just hours earlier. "Tell me about the shot," the general said without preamble. Sarah looked up at the towering alien officer. "Range was approximately 100 yards, sir. Target was moving through a predictable path with minimal wind interference. I calculated lead time and adjusted for local gravity variance. The technical details don't interest me, Private. I want to know how you knew to take it." Sarah considered her answer carefully. "I saw an opportunity that no one else was taking, sir. The enemy commander was exposed. Their forces were bunched up in a kill zone and coalition forces were retreating. Someone needed to act." General Vex was quiet for a long moment, studying the human soldier before him. "Do you know what your shot accomplished, Private?" "It stopped the enemy advance, sir." "It did more than that." The general gestured toward the holographic display. "The Krathan commander you eliminated was Field Marshal Corvin, one of their most experienced battlefield commanders. He had been personally responsible for 17 coalition defeats over the past 2 years. Intelligence had been trying to locate and eliminate him for months." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. She had known the target was important, but not that important. Moreover, the general continued, "Preliminary battlefield analysis suggests that your shot traveled 127 yards and struck a target moving at approximately 12 kilometers per hour while accounting for wind, patterns, and gravitational variance using what are weapons. Experts assure me is primitive chemical projectile technology." "Yes, sir. Private Chen, our best Altarian sharpshooters, using the most advanced energy weapons in the galaxy, have a maximum effective range of 800 yards under ideal conditions. You exceeded that by 40% using what our technical staff refers to as a metal tube that explodes chemicals." Sarah couldn't help but smile slightly. "Human engineering tends to focus on reliability over sophistication, sir." The general made a sound that might have been laughter. "Indeed. Tell me, Private, what is the longest shot you have made in training?" "In perfect conditions, sir? 467 yards. That was on Earth, though, with familiar equipment and terrain." General Vex stopped walking. His bioluminescent patterns flickered in what Sarah had learned was a sign of surprise or excitement. "You're telling me that today's shot was not your maximum capability?" "No, sir. Today was battlefield conditions with limited time for setup. Given proper preparation and favorable conditions, I could do better." The general stood silent for several minutes, processing this information. In the background, Sarah could hear Commander Thex arguing with other coalition officers about proper discipline and the dangers of allowing humans too much autonomy. "Private Chen," the general finally said, "are there other humans with similar capabilities?" "Yes, sir. The Marine Corps has several dozen snipers with comparable skills. The Army has their own specialists and other nations have their own programs. I'm good, but I'm not unique. And these other humans with similar skills, they are currently serving in support roles within coalition forces?" "Those that were allowed to join, yes, sir. Most were assigned to supply duties or communications." General Vex's patterns flickered again. Sarah was beginning to recognize it as the alien equivalent of someone having a very interesting idea. "Private Chen, I want you to understand something. The shot you made today should have been impossible. Not difficult, impossible. Our predictive models say that chemical projectile weapons cannot achieve that kind of accuracy at that range under battlefield conditions. Our combat doctrine has been built around the assumption that energy weapons are superior in every measurable way. But, sir, energy weapons have advantages. Yes, they do. They have many advantages, but they also have limitations that we had not fully considered. Energy weapons lose effectiveness in certain atmospheric conditions. They can be disrupted by electromagnetic interference. And most importantly, they require sophisticated targeting systems that can be jammed or disabled." Sarah nodded, beginning to understand where this was going. "Your weapon," the general continued, "requires no power source beyond the chemical charge. It cannot be jammed. It works in any atmosphere, and apparently in the hands of a skilled human operator, it can outperform our best technology. Sir, are you suggesting, I'm suggesting, Private, that the coalition has been making a fundamental error in how we've been utilizing human forces? We assumed that your species' lack of advanced technology made you inferior soldiers. We never considered that your technology might be different rather than primitive. Behind them, Commander Thex's voice was getting louder as his argument with the other officers intensified. Sarah caught fragments of words about discipline and proper protocol. "General," Sarah said carefully, "what happens now? Commander Thex is right that I disobeyed direct orders." General Vex looked down at her, his expression unreadable by human standards. Commander Thex is a competent logistics officer, but he has never been in battlefield command. He doesn't understand that sometimes the most important orders are the ones that are never given. The general paused, watching the activity on the battlefield below. "Private Chen, how would you feel about a promotion?" Sarah blinked. "Sir? The Coalition has been fighting the Krathen for 3 years. We have superior technology, better logistics, and more resources. But we have been losing because we have been fighting their kind of war. Today you showed us a different approach. I just took a shot, sir. You took an impossible shot that changed the course of a battle. And if there are dozens of other humans with similar capabilities, then perhaps it's time the Coalition learned to fight a human kind of war." General Vex turned to face Sarah directly. "Private Chen, I am creating a new unit within Coalition forces. A specialized long-range reconnaissance and elimination team. I want you to lead the human contingent." Sarah felt her heart racing. This was more than she had ever hoped for when she had volunteered for Coalition service. "Sir, I would be honored. The honor will be mine. Sergeant Chen, because I have a feeling that your species is about to teach the rest of the galaxy some very important lessons about warfare." From across the command post, Commander Thex's voice rose in protest as he realized what was happening. But General Vex had already turned away. His attention focused on the holographic displays showing Coalition forces pressing their advantage across the entire sector. Sarah stood in the alien command post, still hardly believing what had just happened. A single shot had changed everything, not just the battle but potentially the entire war. And somewhere out there, other human soldiers were waiting for their chance to prove what they could do. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had conquered their own world before they had ever left it. Building the PAC-3. Weeks after the shot that had stopped the Krathen advance, Sergeant Sarah Chen stood in a converted cargo bay, watching the strangest military briefing of her life unfold. General Vex had made good on his promise to create a specialized unit, but the reality was more complex than either of them had anticipated. 12 humans sat in makeshift chairs around a holographic projector, each one looking slightly bewildered by their sudden change in status. They had arrived from various Coalition support positions across the sector, pulled from supply duties, communications posts, and maintenance crews. Most had been told only that they were being reassigned to a special operations unit. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, feeling the weight of her new sergeant's stripes, "you're here because you have skills that the Coalition has been ignoring. Each of you scored in the top 5% for marksmanship during your basic training." Corporal Martinez, formerly a supply clerk, raised his hand. "Sergeant, with respect, I haven't fired a weapon in combat since I joined Coalition forces 6 months ago. They gave me an energy rifle for ceremonial duties, but I've been moving boxes ever since." Sarah nodded. "That's exactly the problem we're here to solve. The Coalition has been using humans as support personnel because they assumed our technology was inferior. But sometimes inferior technology has advantages that superior technology doesn't." She activated the holographic projector, showing the battlefield from 3 weeks earlier. "This is the engagement where Field Marshal Corvin was eliminated. I want you to pay attention to the environmental conditions and the tactical situation." The humans watched as the hologram replayed the events of that day. Sarah pointed out the various factors that had made energy weapons less effective. Atmospheric interference from the Triple Star system, electromagnetic disruption from Krathen jamming equipment, and the extreme range required for a clean shot. "Our chemical projectile weapons don't have these limitations," Sarah explained. "They work in any atmosphere. They can't be jammed, and in the right hands, they have a longer effective range than anything the Coalition currently uses." Specialist Kim, a former communications operator, looked skeptical. "Sergeant, that's all well and good, but we're talking about fighting aliens with technology centuries ahead of ours. One good shot doesn't change the fundamental tactical situation." "You're right," Sarah agreed. "One good shot doesn't change everything, but 12 good shots coordinated properly can change a lot more." She switched the hologram to show current Krathen deployment patterns across the sector. "The enemy has adjusted their tactics since Corvin's death. They're keeping their command elements further back, using more cover and maintaining better communication discipline. But they're still vulnerable to the kind of engagement that no one else in the coalition can provide. Over the next several hours, Sarah outlined General Vex's vision for the new unit. They would operate as a long-range reconnaissance and elimination team, using human mobility and marksmanship to target enemy leadership and critical infrastructure from distances that other coalition forces couldn't achieve. The humans were initially doubtful. They had spent months being treated as second-class soldiers, relegated to support roles while aliens did the real fighting. The idea that they could suddenly become elite special forces seemed too good to be true. That doubt began to change when they started training. Sarah had requested permission to construct a proper shooting range, and General Vex had provided resources that exceeded her expectations. The range stretched for over 2 kilometers across the base's eastern sector, with holographic targets that could simulate any enemy the coalition had encountered. The key, Sarah explained as she demonstrated proper shooting positions, is to think like a human, not like an alien. Coalition doctrine emphasizes overwhelming firepower and advanced technology. Human doctrine emphasizes precision, patience, and adaptability. The difference became apparent immediately. While alien soldiers relied on their energy weapons, automatic targeting systems, and rapid-fire capabilities, the humans learned to make every shot count. They practiced reading wind patterns, calculating ballistic trajectories, and most importantly, remaining invisible until the moment they fired. Corporal Johnson, formerly a maintenance technician, proved to have exceptional skills with improvised camouflage. Within days, he was teaching the others how to create hiding spots that were invisible to both optical and electronic detection. Specialist Williams, who had been processing paperwork for the Quartermaster Corps, turned out to have an intuitive understanding of ballistics that impressed even Sarah. He could calculate range and windage, adjustments in his head faster than the coalition's targeting computers. But the real breakthrough came during their first live-fire exercise against Krathen. Positions General Vex had arranged for the human unit to support a standard coalition patrol in a sector where Krathen forces had been harassing supply convoys. The mission was supposed to be routine reconnaissance, observe enemy positions, and report back for a larger operation. The patrol consisted of 20 Altarian soldiers with standard energy weapons, moving through rocky terrain toward a suspected Krathen outpost. The humans were positioned on high ground 2 kilometers away, with orders to observe and provide intelligence. "Contact front," came the voice of the Altarian patrol leader. Enemy forces in prepared positions. Estimate squad strength with heavy weapons support. Through her scope, Sarah could see the tactical situation developing. The Altarians had walked into an ambush. Krathen soldiers were positioned in hardened bunkers with overlapping fields of fire. The patrol was pinned down in the open with minimal cover. "All human units, this is Overwatch," Sarah spoke into her comm. "I count 8 enemy positions. Range 1400 to 1600 yards. Target priority is heavy weapons teams." "Overwatch, this is Stalker 2, came Martinez's voice. "I have eyes on the command bunker. Officer with communication equipment." "Stalker 3 has the Eastern heavy weapon," reported Williams. "Stalker 4, Western heavy weapon, acquired," Johnson added. Sarah smiled grimly. They had been practicing coordinated fires for weeks, but this would be their first real test. "All units on my mark. Fire for effect." Mark 4 rifles fired almost simultaneously. The sound echoed across the battlefield like thunder, but by the time the enemy heard it, the damage was done. The Krathen command post erupted in smoke and debris as Martinez's bullet found its target. Both heavy weapon positions went silent as Williams and Johnson eliminated their crews. Sarah's own shot took out what appeared to be a communications relay. The remaining Krathen soldiers, suddenly leaderless and unable to coordinate their defense, began to waver. The Altarian patrol, no longer pinned down by heavy weapons, pressed their attack and overran the position within minutes. "Overwatch, this is Blue Leader," came the patrol commander's voice. "Enemy position secured. I don't understand what happened, they just stopped fighting effectively." "Blue Leader, this is Overwatch. Enemy command and control was disrupted by long-range fires. Position is secure for your advance." There was a long pause. "Overwatch, confirm you engaged targets at this range?" "Confirmed, Blue Leader. Effective range was 1400 to 1600 yards." Another pause. Sarah could imagine the Altarian commander trying to process what he had just been told. Energy weapons simply couldn't achieve that kind of accuracy at that distance under battlefield conditions. Outstanding work, Overwatch. Blue leader returning to base. As the patrol withdrew, Sarah gathered her team for after-action review. The humans were excited by their success, but she knew this was just the beginning. Good work, everyone, she began. But remember, this was a small engagement against a squad-size element. The real test will come when we face larger forces with better equipment. Specialist Kim looked thoughtful. Sergeant, did you notice how they reacted when their command structure was disrupted? It was like they couldn't adapt to the situation. Sarah nodded. That's exactly right. The Krathen rely heavily on centralized command and control. Take that away, and their tactical cohesion collapses. It's a weakness we can exploit. Over the following weeks, word of the human sniper team's capabilities spread throughout coalition forces. Other units began requesting their support for operations that had previously been considered too dangerous or difficult. Each mission taught them something new about their enemies and about themselves. They learned that Krathen forces were vulnerable to the kind of patient, precise warfare that humans had perfected over millennia of conflict. They discovered that their primitive equipment was actually superior for certain types of operations. Most importantly, they proved that humans could not only fight effectively alongside alien forces, but that they could provide capabilities that no other species possessed. General Vex visited their training range one evening as Sarah was conducting night firing exercises. He watched in silence as human soldiers made precise shots in conditions that would have challenged the coalition's best snipers. Sergeant Chen, he said finally, I believe your species has been teaching us some valuable lessons about warfare. Just getting started, sir, Sarah replied, watching her team work with quiet pride. We're planning some modifications to our equipment that should extend our effective range even further. In a small village, a cat named Whiskers discovered a magic fish in a pond. The fish promised 3 wishes in exchange for its freedom. Whiskers wished for in the art of war. The situation briefing room hummed with tension as representatives from 6 different species studied the holographic display floating above the central table. The Krathen had launched their largest offensive in months, and coalition forces were struggling to contain the advance. Sarah Chen stood at attention beside General Vex, still adjusting to the strange look she received from alien officers who had heard about the human sniper unit, but had never seen one up close. Her team of 12 had grown to 36 over the past 2 months, as more humans with specialized skills were transferred from support roles to combat operations. The situation is critical, General Vex announced to the assembled officers. Krathen forces have broken through our defensive lines in 3 sectors. They are advancing toward the primary manufacturing facility on Kepler 442b. If that facility falls, we lose our ability to produce advanced weapon systems for the entire sector. Admiral Korex, a massive Gorvak with scarred hide and cybernetic implants, growled his disapproval. Our heavy assault units are already engaged. We cannot break through their defensive lines with conventional tactics. They have learned to counter our standard approaches, which is why, General Vex continued, I am proposing a different approach. Sergeant Chen, please brief the Council on Operation Deep Strike. Sarah stepped forward, activating her personal data pad. The holographic display shifted to show detailed terrain maps and enemy positions. Honorable Council members, she began, using the formal address she had learned for multi-species briefings. Human tactical doctrine emphasizes disruption of enemy command and control, rather than direct confrontation with superior forces. She highlighted several positions on the map. Intelligence indicates that the Krathen offensive is being coordinated from 3 command centers located behind their main battle lines. These positions are heavily defended and considered impossible to reach with conventional forces. Admiral Korex leaned forward, his cybernetic eye focusing on the display. Sergeant, those positions are 15 to 20 kilometers behind enemy lines. Even our most advanced stealth technology cannot penetrate that deeply without detection. You're correct, sir, but human infantry can. The room fell silent. Several of the alien officers exchanged glances that Sarah had learned to interpret as skepticism, bordering on disbelief. Commander Thex, who had been notably quiet since Sarah's promotion, finally spoke. Sergeant Chen, Human soldiers on foot cannot possibly traverse 20 kilometers of hostile territory without being detected. The Krathen have sensor networks, patrol schedules, and automated defense systems. Sarah nodded respectfully. Yes, sir. Which is why we won't be avoiding them. We'll be using them. She changed the display to show movement patterns and timing schedules. Krathen military doctrine is extremely rigid. They follow precise schedules for everything. Patrol routes, supply convoys, shift changes, even maintenance cycles. Their strength is their predictability. I fail to see how predictability helps you penetrate their defenses. Admiral Korex rumbled. Sir, if you know exactly where an enemy will be at any given time, you can position yourself to be exactly where they're not looking. Human soldiers have been infiltrating enemy positions for thousands of years. We've developed techniques that don't rely on advanced technology. Sarah activated a detailed animation, showing how her teams would move through Krathen territory. We insert at night during shift change when their sensor operators are distracted. We move during their scheduled maintenance windows when automated systems are offline. We use their own patrol routes as concealment, staying just ahead of their security sweeps. And once you reach these command centers, General Vex asked, though Sarah suspected he already knew the answer. We eliminate the command staff and destroy their communication equipment. 3 coordinated strikes executed simultaneously will leave their entire offensive without central coordination. The alien officers studied the proposed operation with growing interest. It was unlike anything in standard coalition doctrine, which emphasized technological superiority and overwhelming firepower. Sergeant, Admiral Korex said slowly, this plan requires your teams to operate independently for up to 72 hours in hostile territory, with no possibility of extraction if things go wrong. Yes, sir. And you believe human soldiers can accomplish this mission? Sarah thought about her team, former supply clerks and communications operators who had transformed into some of the most effective soldiers she had ever worked with. They had learned to think like humans instead of trying to fight like aliens, and the results had been remarkable. Sir, I believe human soldiers are uniquely suited for this type of mission. We've been preparing for exactly this kind of operation. General Vex stood. The Council will consider Sergeant Chen's proposal. If approved, Operation Deep Strike will commence in 48 hours. The next 2 days were a blur of preparation and planning. Sarah divided her expanded unit into 3 teams of 12, each targeting one of the Krathen command centers. They would insert separately and operate independently, communicating only through coded messages that would appear to be routine coalition traffic. The equipment check was meticulous. Each soldier carried a modified rifle with specialized ammunition designed to penetrate Krathen armor. They wore adaptive camouflage that could adjust to different terrain types and carried enough supplies to operate independently for a week if necessary. Most importantly, they carried something that no other coalition force possessed: the ability to think and adapt like humans. The insertion went flawlessly. 3 small aircraft dropped the teams at predetermined coordinates under cover of darkness, then departed before Krathen sensors could detect them. Sarah's team landed in rocky terrain 12 kilometers from their target, exactly on schedule. Moving through enemy territory proved to be easier than Sarah had expected. The Krathen were indeed rigidly predictable. Their patrol routes never varied. Their sensor sweeps followed precise timing, and their sentries focused on watching for the kind of large-scale movement that characterized coalition attacks. They never looked for 12 humans moving like shadows through terrain they had considered secure. Sarah's team reached their target after 18 hours of careful movement. The Krathen Command Center was built into a natural cave system, with multiple levels and heavy defensive positions. According to intelligence reports, it housed nearly 200 enemy personnel, including senior field commanders. The approach required patience that would have been impossible for most coalition forces. Sarah and her team spent 6 hours observing the facility, noting guard rotations, supply deliveries, and communication schedules. They identified weaknesses in the defensive perimeter and located the primary communication array. The attack came at dawn, during the daily shift change when the facility was at its most vulnerable. Specialist Williams eliminated the external sentries with precise shots from concealed positions. Corporal Martinez led a team through the main entrance while Sarah's group approached from an unguarded maintenance tunnel. The fighting inside the command center was brief, but decisive. Krathen soldiers, trained for long-range combat with energy weapons, were unprepared for close-quarters battle against humans with chemical projectile weapons. The confined spaces that should have favored the defenders instead worked against them. Sarah reached the command center itself to find a scene of controlled chaos. Crathan officers were trying to coordinate their forces' response to attacks that were happening simultaneously across their entire operational area. The other two human teams had struck their targets at exactly the same time. "Surrender," Sarah called out in the broken Crathan she had learned during her months with coalition forces. The enemy commander, a heavily scarred veteran with multiple cybernetic implants, looked at her with what might have been respect. "You are the human sniper who killed Field Marshal Corvin." "I am. We underestimated your species." "Yes, you did." The commander powered down his weapon and placed it on the control console. Around the room, other Crathan officers followed his example. The three command centers fell within minutes of each other. Without central coordination, the massive Crathan offensive collapsed into confusion and retreat. Coalition forces, led by Admiral Korex's heavy assault units, broke through the suddenly disorganized enemy lines and secured the manufacturing facility. The victory was complete, but Sarah knew it was about more than just one successful operation. For the first time since humans had joined the coalition, they had proven that they could not only fight effectively, but that they could accomplish missions that other species considered impossible. When the extraction shuttles arrived to bring the teams home, Sarah looked back at the alien landscape and realized that everything had changed. Humans were no longer the junior partners in the Galactic Coalition. They were becoming something else entirely, specialists in a type of warfare that the galaxy had forgotten was possible. Back at Coalition headquarters, General Vex Wusless Fish, a cozy bed, and a bell that rang softly. The fish granted all three wishes and swam away, leaving Whiskers content and purring in the sun. The Turning Tide Battalion Sergeant Major Sarah Chen stood before the largest assembly of human soldiers ever gathered in Coalition space. 300 men and women filled the converted hangar bay, representing every nation and military tradition from Earth. They had volunteered for what Coalition intelligence called the most dangerous assignment in the current conflict. The holographic display behind Sarah showed the Crathan Empire's core territories, vast swaths of space that had been considered untouchable since the war began. Traditional Coalition strategy had focused on containing Crathan expansion and protecting key defensive positions. But the success of human special operations had opened new possibilities. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, her voice carrying across the assembled troops. 6 months ago, the Coalition leadership considered humans suitable only for support roles. Today, you represent the spearhead of Operation Prometheus, the first offensive operation aimed at striking the Crathan Empire's industrial heartland. The mission briefing took 3 hours. Unlike the small-scale raids that had made human forces famous, Operation Prometheus was a strategic campaign designed to cripple the Crathan war machine at its source. Human battalions would infiltrate 12 separate star systems, targeting manufacturing facilities, command centers, and supply networks that had operated without threat for decades. General Vex had argued for the operation, despite significant opposition from traditional Coalition leadership. Many alien commanders still struggled to accept that human soldiers could accomplish missions that their advanced technology could not, but the results spoke for themselves. Every operation led by human forces had succeeded, often exceeding their original objectives. The resistance came from an unexpected source. High Command on Earth had initially opposed large-scale human involvement in alien conflicts, fearing it would draw attention to humanity's homeworld. But as reports of human military effectiveness spread throughout Coalition space, that position had changed dramatically. "The political situation has shifted," General Vex explained during Sarah's private briefing. "Your species' reputation has spread far beyond Coalition military circles. Several neutral worlds are requesting human advisors for their own defense forces. The Crathan Empire has placed a substantial bounty on any human military personnel." Sarah nodded, understanding the implications. "We've become a strategic asset, sir. More than that, Sergeant Major, you've become a symbol. Coalition morale has improved significantly since human forces began achieving these victories. Our allies see humans as proof that technological superiority isn't everything." The first phase of Operation Prometheus launched from Coalition bases scattered across 6 sectors. Human teams, now equipped with improved weapons and communication systems, deployed to their target systems using stolen Krathan transport vessels. The plan relied on the enemy's assumption that their core territories were too well defended for conventional attack. Sarah's battalion targeted the Krathan Military Academy on Zerion Prime, a heavily fortified world that trained the Empire's officer corps. Intelligence indicated that nearly 1,000 future Krathan commanders were currently at the facility, representing the next generation of enemy leadership. The insertion was more complex than anything human forces had attempted. Sarah's teams had to navigate through 3 separate security perimeters, each one designed to stop different types of threats. The first layer consisted of automated defense platforms in orbit around the planet. The second was a network of ground-based sensors and patrol units. The third was the Academy itself, protected by elite Krathan guard units. But the operation had advantages that traditional coalition forces couldn't provide. Human soldiers could survive in environments that would kill most alien species. They could operate with minimal technological support, making them nearly invisible to sophisticated detection systems. Most importantly, they could adapt their tactics in real time based on changing conditions. The breakthrough came when Corporal Martinez discovered a weakness in Krathan security protocols. Their systems were designed to detect the energy signatures of coalition technology, but they barely registered human chemical weapons and organic heat signatures. It's like they built their defenses to stop tanks, Martinez reported during the infiltration, but nobody told them we were coming on foot. Sarah's battalion reached the academy perimeter after 4 days of movement through hostile territory. The facility was even more heavily defended than intelligence had suggested, with multiple guard towers, energy barriers, and automated weapon systems. A direct assault would have been suicide for any conventional force, but humans didn't fight conventional battles. The attack began with something the galaxy had never seen before: coordinated psychological warfare designed specifically for Krathan psychology. Human soldiers, using captured communication equipment, began broadcasting false information about coalition fleet movements in nearby systems. The messages were designed to create confusion and force the Academy's defenders to divide their attention. While Krathan officers struggled to verify the contradictory reports, human infiltration teams penetrated the facility using techniques that predated spaceflight. They moved through maintenance tunnels, climbed exterior walls under cover of darkness, and even disguised themselves as Krathan maintenance workers using stolen uniforms and crude prosthetics. The assault on the Academy's command center was swift and decisive. Sarah led her team through corridors designed for beings much larger than humans, using their size advantage to move through spaces the defenders couldn't effectively monitor. When they reached the central command facility, they found nearly 200 Krathan cadets and instructors gathered for a tactical exercise. "Attention Krathan personnel," Sarah announced through the facility's public address system, speaking in carefully practiced Krathan. "This facility is now under coalition control. You will surrender your weapons and remain in your current positions." The response was immediate chaos. Young Krathan officers trained for space combat and large-scale warfare had never encountered anything like a human infantry assault. Their instructors, veterans of numerous campaigns against coalition forces, were equally unprepared for the speed and precision of the attack. The surrender came within minutes. Sarah's battalion had captured the Krathan Empire's primary military academy without firing a shot in the final assault. Nearly 1,000 enemy personnel, including some of their most promising future leaders, were now coalition prisoners. But the real impact of Operation Prometheus became clear as reports arrived from the other target systems. Human forces had struck 12 separate facilities simultaneously, crippling Krathan industrial capacity and capturing critical intelligence. The Empire's war machine, which had seemed unstoppable just months earlier, was suddenly struggling to maintain basic operations. The Krathan response was swift and predictable. Their remaining forces launched massive counterattacks against coalition positions throughout the sector, trying to regain the initiative through brute force. But the attacks were poorly coordinated and relied on outdated intelligence. Without their captured command centers and manufacturing facilities, the Krathan military was operating at a fraction of its former effectiveness. General Vex arrived at the captured academy 3 days after the assault, accompanied by a delegation of coalition leaders who wanted to see the results for themselves. Sarah met them at the facility's main entrance, where human soldiers stood guard beside alien prisoners who still seemed stunned by what had happened. "Sergeant Major Chen," the general said formally, "I present Admiral Therex of the Coalition High Command, who has come to assess the strategic implications of your operation." Admiral Therex was a being Sarah had never encountered before, a member of the ancient ethereal species that rarely involved itself in military affairs. He stood nearly 5 meters tall with translucent skin that revealed the complex biomechanical systems within his body. "Sergeant Major," the Admiral spoke with a voice like wind through crystal, "your species has accomplished something remarkable. You have taken an enemy that we considered militarily superior and demonstrated that superior technology does not guarantee victory." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Sir, I think our success comes from approaching warfare differently than other coalition species. We don't try to out-technology our enemies. We try to outthink them." "Indeed. Tell me, what do you believe your species brings to coalition military doctrine that we have been missing?" Sarah looked around at the captured facility, thinking about the path that had brought her from an unwanted observer to the leader of the coalition's most effective military unit. "Sir, I think humans bring the understanding that wars aren't won by having the best weapons. They're won by using your weapons better than your enemy uses theirs. Every human soldier learns that you fight with what you have, not what you wish you had." Admiral Therex was quiet for several minutes, processing this information with the slow deliberation of his species. Finally, he spoke again. "Sergeant Major Chen, Coalition High Command has authorized me to make you an offer. We would like humans to take over training operations for all Coalition Special Forces. Your methods have proven effective against enemies that our traditional approaches could not defeat." Sarah felt her heart racing. This was more than recognition. It was an invitation for humanity to help reshape how the entire galaxy approached warfare. "Sir, I would need to discuss this with my government, but speaking personally, I believe my species would be honored to share what we've learned." "Excellent, because the war with the Krathan Empire is entering a new phase, and we believe human leadership will be essential for victory." As the coalition delegation departed, Sarah remained at the academy, overseeing the processing of prisoners and the securing of captured intelligence, but her mind was already moving ahead to the next challenge. The galaxy had learned that humans could fight effectively and stem the human way of war. Colonel Sarah Chen stood in the war room aboard the coalition flagship, watching as the largest military operation in galactic history unfolded across dozens of star systems. The holographic displays showed thousands of ships, millions of soldiers, and enough firepower to level entire worlds. But the key to victory wasn't in the massive fleets or advanced weapon systems. It was in the small teams of human soldiers who had learned to fight like their ancestors had fought for millennia. "Colonel," General Vex approached her station, his forearms working multiple control interfaces as he coordinated the vast operation. "Admiral Therex is requesting an update on Phase 3 objectives." Sarah nodded, pulling up the tactical display for the current operations. 6 months had passed since Operation Prometheus, and the galaxy had changed dramatically. Human military advisors now served with every major coalition fleet. The special warfare techniques that had started with a single impossible shot had evolved into a comprehensive doctrine that was reshaping how civilized species approached conflict. Phase 3 is proceeding. "Ahead of schedule, sir," Sarah reported. "Human infiltration teams have successfully penetrated the Krathan Empire's 3 remaining command centers. We expect all objectives to be secured within 12 hours. The transformation had been remarkable. What had begun as a desperate experiment with primitive human soldiers had become the coalition's primary military strategy. Human officers now commanded mixed-species units, teaching alien soldiers to think tactically rather than relying solely on technological superiority. The change hadn't been without resistance. Many coalition species struggled to adapt their thinking from the high-technology warfare they had practiced for centuries. The concept of using deception, misdirection, and psychological warfare instead of direct confrontation was foreign to cultures that valued honor and straightforward combat. But the results were undeniable. In every engagement where human tactical doctrine had been applied, coalition forces had achieved victory at a fraction of the expected cost. The Krathan Empire, which had seemed invincible just a year earlier, was now struggling to maintain control of its core territories. Colonel Chen, Admiral Therex's ethereal voice came through the command channel. Please join me in the strategic planning chamber. We need to discuss the final phase of the operation. Sarah made her way through the flagship's corridors, still amazed by the respect she now received from alien officers who had once dismissed humans as inferior soldiers. The ship's captain, a massive Gorvak warrior, nodded respectfully as she passed. The navigation crew, composed of precision-oriented Altarians, stopped their work to acknowledge her presence. The strategic planning chamber held representatives from 12 different species, each one commanding fleets that had been reorganized according to human military principles. Admiral Therex stood at the center, his translucent form somehow dominating the room despite being outnumbered by beings far larger than himself. Colonel Chen, the Admiral began without preamble. Intelligence indicates that the Krathan Empire is preparing for a final desperate offensive. They are concentrating their remaining forces for an all-or-nothing attack on Coalition headquarters. Sarah studied the tactical display, noting the massive concentration of enemy ships moving toward the Coalition's primary base. Sir, their force composition suggests they're planning a traditional direct assault. Maximum firepower, minimal subtlety. Precisely. Which is why this presents us with an opportunity to end the war decisively. Admiral Therex manipulated the holographic controls, showing the enemy's projected approach routes. If we allow them to commit to this attack, we can use human tactical doctrine to turn their strength against them. The plan that emerged over the next several hours was ambitious beyond anything the Coalition had previously attempted. Instead of meeting the Krathan offensive with their own massive fleet, they would use human-trained infiltration teams to strike at the Empire's remaining infrastructure, while their forces were committed to the attack. It was a strategy that required perfect timing and absolute trust in human military capabilities. Coalition forces would appear to retreat, drawing the Krathan fleet into a pursuit that would leave their homeworlds defensively vulnerable. Meanwhile, human special forces would execute simultaneous strikes against every major Krathan facility in known space. The risk is enormous, General Vex pointed out during the planning session. If the infiltration operations fail, our main fleet will be outnumbered 3-1 with no possibility of retreat. Sarah considered the tactical situation carefully. The plan relied on capabilities that only human soldiers possessed. The ability to operate independently for extended periods, to adapt their tactics based on changing conditions, and to accomplish missions that other species considered impossible. Sir, she said finally, human forces have never failed to achieve their objectives, but this operation is larger than anything we've attempted. We're talking about coordinated strikes across an entire stellar empire, executed simultaneously with perfect timing. Can it be done, Colonel? Admiral Therex asked directly. Sarah thought about the soldiers under her command. They had come so far from the support personnel and observers that the Coalition had originally accepted. They had learned to fight like humans instead of trying to imitate alien warfare, and they had become the most effective military force in known space. Yes, sir. It can be done. The preparation took 2 weeks. Human teams deployed throughout Krathan space using techniques that had been refined through dozens of successful operations. They moved like ghosts through enemy territory, avoiding detection while positioning themselves to strike at critical targets. Sarah personally led the team assigned to the Krathan capital world, the most heavily defended target in the Empire. The planet's orbital defenses were designed to stop entire fleets, but they weren't configured to detect a small team of humans using captured transport vessels and forged identification codes. The infiltration of the capital required every skill that human forces had developed over the past year. Sarah's team spent 3 days moving through the planet's security checkpoints, disguised as Krathan maintenance workers and using captured equipment to bypass electronic sensors. The target was the Central Command Complex, the facility that coordinated all Krathan military operations throughout the Empire. Destroying it would leave their offensive fleet without strategic direction, just as the Coalition's apparent retreat drew them further from their home territories. The complex was a fortress designed to withstand orbital bombardment, but its architects had never considered the possibility of infiltration by human infantry. Sarah's team entered through the facility's waste management system, moving through pipes and maintenance tunnels that were too small for Krathan soldiers to follow. The final assault came just as the Krathan offensive fleet engaged coalition forces 3 star systems away. While massive space battles raged in the distance, 12 human soldiers fought their way through the most secure facility in the Krathan Empire. The fighting was brutal, but brief. Krathan security forces, trained for large-scale combat operations, were unprepared for the close-quarters warfare that humans had perfected over millennia of conflict. Sarah's team reached the command center to find enemy officers desperately trying to coordinate their forces' response to attacks that were happening simultaneously across their entire empire. "This is Colonel Sarah Chen of the Galactic Defense Coalition," she announced as her soldiers secured the facility. "This complex is now under coalition control. Order your fleets to stand down." The Krathan Supreme Commander, an ancient warrior with cybernetic implants covering half his body, looked at Sarah with something that might have been respect. "You are the human who started this transformation in coalition warfare. I'm the human who took a shot when everyone else said it was impossible. And now you have taken our entire empire using the same principles." The surrender came 6 hours later. With their command structure destroyed and their home territories occupied by human forces, the Krathan offensive fleet had no choice but to accept coalition terms. The war that had raged for 3 years ended not with a massive space battle, but with the call-scale operations. Now they were about to discover what happened when human military doctrine was applied on a strategic scale. The Krathan Empire had controlled this region of space for over a century. But they had never faced an enemy that thought like humans, and that, Sarah realized, might be the key to ending the war entirely. Legacy of the impossible shot 5 years after the end of the Krathan War. Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the Coalition Defense Academy, watching human and alien cadets train together in the methods that had once been dismissed as primitive. The galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted when she first took that impossible shot on Kepler 442b. The academy itself was built on the former site of the Krathan military installation she had captured. The irony wasn't lost on her. The facility that had once trained Empire officers to conquer coalition worlds now taught cooperative warfare to beings from dozens of different species. "Admiral," came a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned to see General Vex approaching, his forearms carrying multiple datapads as always. The years had been kind to the Nexari officer, and his bioluminescent patterns glowed with the satisfaction of someone who had backed the right strategy. "General," Sarah replied warmly, "how are the new cadets adapting to integrated training?" "Better than expected. The Krathan students are particularly eager to learn human tactical doctrine. They seem to view it as a form of redemption for their previous failures." Sarah nodded, watching as a mixed unit of humans, Altarians, and former Krathan soldiers worked through a complex infiltration exercise. The sight would have been unthinkable just years earlier, but it had become routine in the post-war galaxy. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Many coalition species had struggled to adapt their military thinking from the technology-focused approaches they had used for centuries. The concept of emphasizing individual skill and tactical flexibility over advanced equipment was foreign to cultures that had built their entire military doctrine around technological superiority. But the results spoke for themselves. Coalition forces now operated with an effectiveness that had been impossible under the old system. More importantly, the emphasis on human-style cooperation and adaptability had begun to influence civilian society as well. Trade relationships between species had strengthened. Diplomatic solutions were being found for conflicts that would previously have led to war, and the galaxy was experiencing unprecedented peace and prosperity. "Admiral," General Vex continued, "I wanted to discuss the situation in the Outer Rim. The exploration fleets have encountered another species that appears to be hostile to coalition expansion." Sarah sighed. The galaxy was vast, and despite the coalition's growing influence, there were always new challenges on the frontier. "What do we know about them?" "Preliminary reports suggest they're technologically advanced, but use tactics similar to what the Krathan employed before they encountered human doctrine. Direct confrontation, overwhelming firepower, rigid command structures. In other words, they're fighting yesterday's war." "Precisely. Coalition Command is requesting that you personally oversee the diplomatic mission," They believe that having the architect of modern coalition doctrine present will demonstrate our commitment to peaceful resolution. Sarah considered the request. Her role had evolved significantly since the Crathan War. As the first human to reach flag rank in coalition forces, she had become both a symbol of human military effectiveness and an advocate for the principles that had made that effectiveness possible. The Academy's main training facility drew her attention as an alarm sounded, indicating the start of a major exercise. Below, she could see hundreds of cadets from dozens of species preparing for a simulated campaign that would test everything they had learned about integrated warfare. Admiral Chen to the command center came an announcement over the facility's communication system. Priority message from Coalition High Command. Sarah and General Vex made their way to the Academy's Central Command Facility, a sophisticated installation that served as both a training center and an active military headquarters. The message waiting for them carried the highest security classification, indicating its importance. Admiral Therex's ethereal image appeared in the holographic projector, his translucent features showing unusual concern. Admiral Chen, General Vex. We have received intelligence indicating that the hostile species in the Outer Rim possesses technology that may be superior to our current capabilities. They appear to have developed weapon systems that can neutralize our standard energy-based defenses. Sarah studied the technical data that accompanied the message. The new species, designated as the hegemony by Coalition intelligence, had indeed developed impressive technology. Their weapons could adapt to enemy defensive systems, making traditional coalition tactics ineffective. Sir, Sarah said after reviewing the information, their technology is advanced, but their tactical doctrine appears to be even more rigid than what the Crathan used. They rely entirely on technological superiority and seem to have no concept of adaptability or deception, which is why Coalition Command believes human doctrine may be effective against them. Admiral Therex continued. But this situation is more complex than previous conflicts. The hegemony controls a significant portion of the Outer Rim, and they appear to be expanding toward coalition space. General Vex leaned forward, studying the tactical displays. Sir, are we looking at another major war? We hope not, General. But Coalition Command wants to be prepared for all possibilities. Admiral Chen, you are requested to take command of the Outer Rim Defense Force. Your mission is to establish contact with the hegemony and, if possible, achieve a peaceful resolution to this situation. Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. The peace that had followed the Crathan War had allowed the coalition to grow and prosper, but it had also made many species complacent about the possibility of future conflicts. Sir, I'll need authorization to implement full human tactical doctrine, including the integration of former Crathan forces into coalition units. Granted. You have complete authority to organize your forces as you see fit. The briefing continued for another hour, covering intelligence reports, logistical considerations, and diplomatic protocols. When it concluded, Sarah found herself facing the largest military challenge since the end of the Crathan War. But as she looked around the Academy's command center, watching human and alien officers work together with an efficiency that would have been impossible under the old system, she felt confident about the coalition's chances. General Vex, she said as they prepared to depart for the Outer Rim, do you remember what you told me after that first shot? That my species would teach the galaxy about warfare? I do, Admiral, and I believe that prediction has proven accurate. I think it's time for the next lesson. The galaxy learned that humans can fight effectively. Now they're going to learn what happens when human tactical doctrine is applied by an entire coalition. The preparation for the Outer Rim deployment took 6 weeks. Sarah assembled a force that represented the best of coalition military evolution, human strategic thinking, Altarian precision, Gorvac heavy assault capabilities, and Crathan technological expertise, all integrated into a cohesive fighting force. The flagship of the new fleet was the CNS Prometheus, named after the operation that had broken Crathan resistance. Its crew included representatives from 8 different species, all trained in the integrated warfare techniques that had become standard throughout coalition space. As the fleet prepared to depart for the Outer Rim, Sarah stood once again on an observation deck, watching the organized chaos of a military force preparing for deployment. But this time she wasn't watching as an outsider hoping to prove herself worthy. She was the commander of the most effective military force in galactic history. Her personal aide, Lieutenant Commander Martinez, the same soldier who had once been a supply clerk before learning to fight like a human, approached with the final departure reports. Admiral, all units report ready for hyperspace transition. The fleet is awaiting your orders. Sarah looked out at the stars, thinking about the path that had brought her here. It had started with a single impossible shot, taken by a soldier who had been told to stay on the sidelines. It had continued with the gradual recognition that humans brought something unique to galactic warfare. And it had culminated in the transformation of how an entire galaxy approached conflict and cooperation. "Lieutenant Commander," she said quietly, "signal the fleet. All units, prepare for hyperspace transition. Destination, Outer Rim Sector 7. Aye, Admiral. Signaling the fleet now." As the ships around them began to shimmer with the energy of hyperspace engines, Sarah reflected on what they represented. This wasn't just a military force heading toward a potential conflict. It was the embodiment of everything that humans had taught the galaxy about working together, adapting to challenges, and finding strength in diversity. The hegemony possessed advanced technology and superior firepower, but they had never faced an enemy that fought the way humans had taught the coalition to fight. They had never encountered the tactical flexibility, psychological warfare, and adaptive thinking that had become humanity's gift to the galaxy. And most importantly, they had never faced an enemy that understood the most fundamental human military principle, that wars are won not by having the best weapons, but by using whatever weapons you have better than your enemy uses theirs. As the fleet entered hyperspace, beginning the journey toward humanity's next great challenge,